So I just finished reading the book Moneyball, and there's a lot of very important lessons within that story. So I'm just going to share that with you today. That is going to be the point of this episode. It's going to be a little bit more lighthearted. It's going to be a little bit more fun, and it's going to be, a good lesson as to, how to live a good life and how to achieve great things. So Moneyball is a book about baseball, right? I've been getting into baseball a lot personally. What I thought of the book, first of all, spoilers, right? Spoiler warning. There's a book and there's a movie. I didn't watch the movie. I only read the book, so I'm going to talk about what relates to the book. A lot of people probably have watched just the movie, but it's all good. If you haven't watched either, if you want to watch it, just pause here and, don't watch because I'm going to talk about the book, so spoiler alert, spoiler warning. But if you're interested in learning about the lessons of the book right now, then, stay with me, right? So it's about baseball, right? You don't have to necessarily be interested in baseball to watch this reflection, but you definitely have to be super, super interested to, read the book and digest everything that's in the book. Because there's parts of the book that are super interesting. There are also parts that are a drag, that are for the real, baseball fanatics, right? So me personally, I'm not that deep into baseball. Baseball's still, my secondary sport, right? Football, of course, is number one, but it's still, it was still interesting. It was definitely still interesting for me. But the point I'm trying to make is if you even have small interest in baseball, maybe there's some good parts of it, but it's probably more targeted to an audience where you know you're incredibly deeply rooted in baseball, and it's you want to know everything. And I'm going to get into it, right? So there were, great moments of the book. The funnest parts, the funniest parts, in my opinion, were the parts where they were actually in, and we actually, they were, you know, they're talking about negotiations for players and, situations in games and stuff like that. Even stories about players that should never have made it, but then made it because of whatever, some circumstance. Those were good parts, but then there were parts of the book that were just 40-page segments on the history of baseball statistics, and that's where you lose me, right? That's where it's ooh, it gets it becomes a little bit of a drag. So there was a little bit of both, right? If you're an intense baseball fan, all of that stuff's good, right? But if you're just more casual, it's kind of what I felt. There's some good and there's some bad. There's some exciting and some boring. So the story of Moneyball. I'm going to give a quick little recap of it. And then, I'm going to talk about what I thought of it and my opinions on the book and, the lesson from it, right? The story of the book, it starts, with Billy Beane, right? Billy Beane is the main character. He didn't really want to be, but the author of the book, made it like that. Painted the picture like that. Billy Beane, he was an athletic specimen, right? He was the person that if you looked at him, he was destined to play baseball. He had everything about him. He hit hard. He was super fast, super athletic. He understood what to do at the plate when he was at bat. He was a good defender. He made diving catches in the outfield. He had, how many scouts over him? So many scouts were watching him, and he was in high school. He was 17, 18 years old. And everyone was convinced that this would be the next big thing. And it didn't turn out that way. Turns out they rushed him to the big leagues. They rushed him to become pro. And as a result, he never fully grasped his issues. He never fully was able to control his insecurities. And that affected him big time in Major League Baseball. Where not only did he not become great, he only had five mediocre seasons at the top. And that's it. That's it. 5 seasons in professional. When in high school at 18, everyone thought he was going to be the next big thing. He ended up being quite mediocre and retiring early. He retired early to go into management, right? Go into the back office. Where then the main point of the story takes shape, where he's managing the Oakland Athletics, and he doesn't have a big budget, so he's kind of forced into making decisions and signing players that are high value but low price, right? Like they're actually good players that everyone else overlooks. And they developed this big system where instead of getting scouts and looking at players and judging players based on how they see them as, they look at computer statistics and data of how they actually are as a player. Because then, they'll sign this fat guy, right? These fat guys that you look at them and a lot of scouts reject because it's like, oh, dude, he doesn't look like a baseball player, but his stats are amazing. So they sign him because no one else wants him for cheap, and that's how he was able to build a good team that won a lot of baseball games. I'm going to say my problem with it, and it's sad in the end, but my problem with it is that they never actually won. Like, they never won the World Series. They never won the whole baseball thing, right? They won their division, but they always got knocked out in the first round of the playoffs for 2 or 3 years in a row, trying this whole strategy of, signing fringe players that no one else wanted. They did well. They won a lot of games, but they couldn't get it over the line. So I'm like, that's kind of, it's a little bit sad, right? You have this heroic story about how you're defying the odds and how the poorest team is making it, right, and is actually doing well and is beating the big teams, but they didn't actually win. They didn't even make it close. But the story of Billy Beane is honestly a little bit sad in the end. It starts off with this kid. He's right out of high school. He's the next big thing. And then he doesn't become that. And he does well in management, but even in management, he doesn't quite reach the end. He doesn't even make it to the top, the World Series, right? The thing that every baseball player aspires to achieve. Didn't get it, right? Didn't get it. Fell short. And that's not the full story. He still has a huge legacy. He still has an absolutely massive following, and because of the story of the book, it really did change. Like, what Billy Beane did really did change the way of the game, and that's why now modern baseball, like the reason why it talks about baseball statistics is because now modern baseball uses most of those exact statistics that 30 years ago most teams didn't care about. Most teams were like, oh no, this is crap. Right, you're going to keep going with the conventional wisdom of, oh, you have to see a player and you have to look like a baseball player to be a baseball player. So, case in point, there were some good things about the book, some bad things about the book, but the overall concept of the story is a little bit sad that he just never quite was able to reach the top. Why was that? You then have to go and analyze it. Why didn't he actually make it? There's many reasons. It's really a mental thing. And that is the biggest lesson in all sports. It can be transferred and applied to my own football career. It can be transferred and applied to any other sport. He had the talent. Everyone recognized he had the talent. But whenever things went wrong for him, he would rage. He would smash his bat. He would smash things. He would just get angry, just in a fit of intense anger, and he can never learn to control it. So then it would affect his future at bats, it would affect his future performances, and he would just spiral out of control. And him constantly spiraling out of control, he would slowly start to, let that thought enter his mind that he's not actually good enough, that he's not actually capable of making it. It was a slow and kind of painful downfall from being the best player in high school to then failing in the major leagues because of not being able to wrap his head around it. It's not all his fault. It's more so the fault of conventional baseball wisdom because they just quickly shuffled him to the top and promoted him quicker than he was ready mentally to grasp. He wanted to play in university. He would have rathered, if he had made the choice differently, he would have rathered played for his university team. He would have played baseball and American football for his university team. But instead the agent interested in him, the biggest agent interested in him, persuaded him and maybe even say manipulated him into taking the big league contract and signing a deal with the New York Mets. And he did it, and he said himself that that was the only decision he made based off of the money, and he was getting a good payday, obviously. But maybe his life would have been better if he had chosen to wait a little bit, to develop a little bit more, to shape himself a little bit more. Maybe he would have met the right coaches that could have molded him in a better way and helped solve his like mental issues and his breakdown issues and his insecurities. But he never found that. And because of how quickly he was promoted, he got promoted, in professional sports, there's this hostility to it. And it's this natural thing in all sports. He got promoted right away where really he wasn't ready. And he was never ready. He never became ready. So that when he actually made it into the majors and he was actually playing relatively consistently, he wasn't really all that good. And it's a very sad thing considering the potential he had. And he'd be in he'd be training and he'd be smashing home runs farther and better than anyone else has ever seen. And the coaches would literally be asking him, why don't you do that in the games? It's a similar type of thing that I have felt in my life, where I could do so well in a training when I'm playing for fun, when there's no pressure. It's easy to just let loose and take risks and enjoy yourself. But when you're in the moment of the pressure of the game, it's much harder to keep that same mentality. But it's crucial to keep that same mentality of not fearing it, being fearless, and not being stuck in your own head. So I've felt those types of things myself. So I understand the situation Billy's coming from. But unfortunately, he never fully was able to grasp it. He was never able to defeat his insecurities, defeat the devil on his shoulder. Instead, he just fell. So he decided that, this wasn't for him, and he quickly made the move into a upper management position, which ended up being good. Like, he ended up doing super well. And he ended up revolutionizing baseball, which there's something super important to that. Don't watch this video and think, oh, Billy Beane is not anybody. He's a failed person. No, not necessarily. But, after this little rant, the main point I'm trying to make is the fact that his lack of self-control and his lack of discipline and emotional discipline, whether at the plate or even outside of baseball, it would carry to his life outside of baseball, cost him a lot of things in his life. So, as a person watching this video, my biggest lesson for that is don't let that happen to you. His baseball career was, okay, yes, you can blame the major league system for making him, thrusting him into the spotlight before he was ready. Sure, you can blame him. You can blame that. But there's also a part that he himself has to grasp that he never did. And he never did. Even into his management. He never actually grasped that. And he was never able to control his emotions. He developed this secretive hate towards baseball to the point where when he was the manager, he would never watch the games. He'd be the general manager of operations is really what it is. He wasn't the actual coach. He'd be the manager of operations. And he wouldn't watch any of his own team's games because he just couldn't handle the emotions that went through it. When something went wrong, he would scream and curse and get angry and jump up and down and walk around and storm out of the room and smash things. And he's just watching the game, right? Imagine his attitude when he was actually playing. The adrenaline made it worse. And when things went well, he would just kind of shrug it off, like, yeah, whatever. This is just another day's work. So he fell victim to that, not appreciating the victories, but focusing way too much on the losses, on the bad moments. And when you're constantly focused on those negative things, it spirals out of control. And for him, it did spiral out of control in the form of anger and fits of rage and smashing things and many, many, many broken bats. That's how it kind of came out for him. For other people, it comes out in a different way. For other people, it comes out maybe in like a subtler, just dropping the head, lack of confidence, like shrinking into their shell type of way. For Billy, it was like the exact opposite. He would just smash things. It'd be in a fit of rage. It'd be super obvious for everyone to see. And, well, it affected him in his playing days. It affected him in his management days. He made some decisions that were a little bit more based off of emotion than logic. And it affected him in his personal life. He broke up with his wife because his wife couldn't handle that type of energy. So he fell victim to the fact that he could not control his own emotions. Maybe the reason he couldn't control his own emotions was partially down to the fact that he was thrust into this limelight, into the big scope of pressure that he was never ready for. But he never got ready for it. And at some point, it kind of is down to him. At some point, at some level, it was down to him. Obviously, there is a lot that could have been down to the coaches, down to the system. People should have realized that he had these anger issues when things weren't going wrong and should have tried to mold him and help him, and that probably would have made him better. But at some point, when he was starting to realize that he just wasn't built for baseball, like mentally he wasn't ready for baseball, he never tried to actually fix it. He just kind of continued to sink in his shell and continue to be less and less confident until he decided to quit. So you could say it's wasted potential. You could say it. But the thing that kind of made it the most sad for me is that it's like he did all these great things with the Oakland Athletics as the general manager. And with all of his emotional turmoils and all of this stuff and all of his breakdowns and mental fits and all of this stuff, they were still a really, really good team. 2002, 2003 seasons, they won their division. They won more games than they even projected to win, having lost their star players and replaced them with players that everyone else thought was crap. Fat players, players with like issues, pitchers that throw underhand, players that are recovering from serious injuries, from nerve fractures, from nerve ruptures, and people with like minor disabilities even. The Oakland Athletics kind of brought all these unconventional players in, and it worked because they looked at the stats rather than their own physical appearance and saw that their stats were better, so it worked, and they were able to win so many games. But then came the playoffs, the crunch time, the moment where it mattered the most, and they never were able to make it past the first round. They would always just get cooked. And it proved the conventional, then writers, and there's this whole, this political debate, right, of like the conventional wisdom being right versus this new Oakland A's philosophy. It's like, only God knows, right? But, we found in recent times that the Oakland Athletics actually had something to say. And more teams immediately after that amazing 2002 season started to implement those exact tactics. Where now today there's still some issues in baseball, but it's a lot better in comparison to where it was like in the 80s, around the time where Billy Beane was just coming up. And he himself was subject to a lot of those problems. So then he kind of, as a manager, was set out to solve those issues. And they did well, but they still didn't make it. It might just be because my understanding of baseball is a bit different from the average fan, because I'm still a little bit new. I'm still just kind of learning about it. But it feels like it's a bit underwhelming, right? And Billy Beane explained it himself as it's his job to make it through the season. When it comes to the playoffs, it's just, all hands on deck. There's nothing you can do, because it's this idea that over the season, there's a combination of skill and luck. There's a lot of luck involved, but the luck aspect kind of evens out. You can get super unlucky, but because you play so many games, you'll get super lucky in some games, and you'll get super unlucky in other games, and it'll even out. In the playoffs, it's so much shorter that you either get super lucky and you win, or you get super unlucky and you lose, and there's nothing you can really do. That was the kind of mentality, and there's something to that. There's absolutely something to that. Like the Blue Jays lost the World Series this year because they were unlucky, simply put. So at some point, skill is completely taken out of the equation in the playoffs. So you can argue that, but you can also say, you did all this work to make a good team and defy the odds, and they couldn't even make it past the first round. So to me, that's a little bit depressing. It's a little bit like, the story really should have had that happy ending of making it all the way and winning everything and truly defying the critics, truly defying the odds, but it never actually reached that point, which to me made it a bit sad, right? To me, it made the book a little bit, it left me with a little bit of bitterness, a little bit of questioning, really? That's how it ended? That's a super underwhelming way to end what would have been a very noble and inspiring story. But I guess that's life. So the main lesson is exactly that. You have to control your own mental state. You have to learn that it's up to you to fix these issues. If you have these types of problems, right, whether it's anger issues or you're just insecure, like you're on the field, you're playing a sport and you're feeling super fearful, you have to find ways to control that. You have to offset that in other ways. You have to test different things. Find meditation, find it through prayer, through God, through, a higher power giving you more strength, and belief in God, belief in Jesus, for example, is a super powerful thing. But you can also find it in, I don't know, you could find it in listening to music, meditation. You can find it in just fixing your own habits outside of the game, like eating healthy, sleeping well and eating healthy. Or if you have anger issues, you, I don't know, buy a punching bag and let out your anger on the punching bag or something like that. Some sort of a thing like that. I did that at times myself. I actually did have a punching bag myself where I let out some anger on a few occasions. So just understand that in the world, not just in sports, you're going to require every single last bit of yourself. And if you fall short, if when things don't go your way, you throw a tantrum. If when things don't go your way, you get super angry or you just fall into your shell, you get sad, you're never going to make it. You're never going to make it big. And unfortunately, Billy Beane learned that lesson the hard way, but the truth of the matter is that you have to understand that failure is a good thing. Failure is a really, really good thing because if you don't fail, you'll never be successful. But it's how you handle it. If you can't handle failure, you're never going to be able to bounce back from it. You're going to continue to fail. You're going to continue to make the same mistakes because you don't actually seek to do better because you're so focused on your own emotions. But if you're able to fail and fall and you make a mistake and people scrutinize you, but you're able to realize, okay, it happened, it didn't go my way, but that's okay. I'm going to keep training, I'm going to keep working hard so that it does go my way in the future. And you stay mentally strong in baseball. You have one bat at bat, instead of smashing your bat and getting angry and then letting it affect the rest of your game, you realize, all right, I'm going to come back out in a couple innings and I'm going to do better. It's a better way to just frame things. It's easier said than done because I know some people have dispositions, and perhaps that was Billy Beane's disposition. And again, if he had had better nurture from coaches around him, he probably would have actually made it, and he would have been able to fight off those feelings. But as an individual person, you have to understand that failure is a good thing in the long run. It feels like crap in the moment, but in the long run, it's a real secret blessing that you failed because purposefully God made you not make it so that you can learn the lessons, and that's the beauty of life. And if you really do take the lessons, you will turn those failures into an eventual success. That's the biggest lesson here of this entire story, the story of Moneyball. Although there was never actually real, tangible success, there was definitely a good legacy that Billy Beane built. There's definitely proof that he was like the pioneer for this new type of an idea in baseball, and he revolutionized this idea of being actually in many different teams as systems. So that's good for him. You can look at that and be like, that's a good thing. It's a good thing. It's a noble thing, and it actually worked out. But in terms of actual baseball success, it didn't really happen for him ever. But you, being a person watching this video, being a person perhaps interested, being a person in sport, maybe even in baseball, it's important for you to understand that you will fail 100%. How do you react? How do you respond? Are you just going to let it consume you, or are you going to overcome it? However, whatever way you decide to figure it out, you're going to have to continue to mentally build yourself stronger so that you don't end up being that wasted potential, so that you don't end up being that person that couldn't make it because you couldn't mentally be strong enough. You'd rather be the person that just was never good enough, right? You'd rather just be the person that, you tried your best, you were mentally tough, you always worked hard, but talent, you just didn't have enough to get yourself over the line. You'd rather be that than be the person that let your own mind play tricks on you to stop you from making it big. That's my own opinion. I don't think that's fact, but I think based on what I've experienced, based on reading this book and seeing how things have gone, that, yeah, that makes sense. That you would rather have done everything you possibly could and then still not made it because of luck or because you just didn't have the talent, because people overlooked you. You'd rather be that person than the person that had everything at their feet and wasted it because they didn't have the right mindset going into things, and they didn't have a tough enough mind to get through failures, and every time they failed, they would fall. And they would fall back into their own shell, into their older habits. So that was the type of situation Billy Beane had, and he let it bleed into other things in his life, right? And then it just causes all sorts of problems. And perhaps the other lesson is that this is life. This is really life summed up in one man's story, which is like, there's times where there won't be the happy ending. There won't be the perfect fairy tale ending to someone's story. But there's still great lessons, there's still a great legacy, and there's still subtle things that were important and impactful as a result of whatever happened. In this case, the way baseball was shaped in the future was in part because of Billy Beane's work. So it's important to recognize that, and for me personally, I also probably have to recognize that it's an important thing, that it's not just all doom and gloom. It's literally like, it's okay. It's okay that it didn't necessarily work out because there were still other good things and good positive things from it. But really, for Billy Beane, in my opinion, it could have been so much more if he was able to control his emotions. And perhaps it's just the realness of it, right? In a fairy tale fantasy story, like in just a movie, right? It ends in a happy ending, usually. If movies don't end in happy endings, it's usually not a good movie, right? It usually ends with some sort of a happy ending. But in this case, it didn't really end with that type of happiness and that type of, whatever you want to call it, that type of, just the perfect ending. It never ended like that. But maybe that's, the melancholy of it. It's just life, right? It's just life. It's not always going to end like that. But it's still beautiful because there's still great things and great lessons and great ideas that can come from it. And I'm kind of talking myself into just appreciating the book more, because honestly, I was really disappointed. Like, when I finished reading it, I only read it in a few days. Like, I was like really pushing through it. I was super engaged for the majority of it. There were many funny moments, funny comments, funny interactions, interesting parts of baseball that I've never seen before. And then I got to the end, I was like, really? That's how it ended? But the more I kind of talk about it, the more I kind of think about it, the more I'm like, yeah, it makes sense. It's life, man. It's the real world. It's not going to be perfect. It's not a movie. It's not a fairy tale. It's going to be real. So in your lives, things are going to be real. You're going to feel real pain. You're going to feel real anger. You're going to feel real failure. But the point is, you can't let it completely take you over and destroy your potential. Because each and every one of us has this hidden potential to be better. You just have to make the conscious decision every day to go out and grab it. Go out and realize that potential each and every day in your life. So having read Moneyball, those are the things I learned. And I think those were some important lessons, some important insights, and very interesting things. Honestly, it's literally, I'm making this episode truly just because it's something interesting. It was something cool that I think would be an interesting thing to a lot of people. And if you guys are interested in it, you guys like it, you guys enjoy it, let me know. Leave a like and subscribe to the podcast. Follow if you're on Spotify. I would truly appreciate it. Tomorrow, I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow, but, that's what I got the podcast for, to kind of look and think. 365 Podcast. We're making an episode every single day until 365 days has passed. I think this is episode 90. So thank you for your support so far if you've been here. But yes, please subscribe if you're new. If you enjoy this type of content, subscribe. Let me know what you think. What do you want to see in the future? What are topics that you want me to cover? What are books, movies, like whether it's an interesting thing or a deeper topic? What do you want me to cover? Let me know, and I'll be here. And I'll see you tomorrow for the next episode.